The 9.3 by 62 millimeter cartridge. Not well known in this country, but man, is it catching fire. Everybody seems to be talking about it, and yet most of us have never heard of it. Well, we're going to find out on this episode of Ron Spomer Outdoors Podcast. Hi everyone, hey, Ron Spomer. I've been hearing from a lot of folks about this crazy 9.3 by 62 millimeter cartridge. And what exactly is it? I wrote a blog on this quite a while ago. It is on my website, ronspomeroutdoors.com. And someone referenced it the other day, and I went in and checked it and thought, you know what, this just might be worth reading. For all of you who don't read the blogs on my website, you get an idea of what is on there, but you can also learn something about this exciting new cartridge that's really pretty old, but it just seems to finally be catching on here in the United States of America and in Canada. And that kind of goes to show how a lot of these cartridges that we have never really known or have ignored or have figured were obsolete can suddenly be rediscovered. So if you will, let me read this to you, and then afterward we will discuss this cartridge a little bit more, show you some examples, and see what you think. So this is titled The Surprising 9.3 by 62 Rifle Cartridge. The 9.3 by 62. As a firearms and hunting writer, I expect to discover and investigate new guns and cartridges. I don't anticipate discovering an old cartridge that is trending. But this one is. The 9.3 by 62 of 1905, which doesn't even have a last name, is finally catching the spotlight in the US of A. Some call it the German 9.3 by 62, the poor man's 375 H&H. Some call it the perfect medium bore, better than the 35 Whelen, certainly more powerful and versatile than the 30-06. Not bad for a cartridge born a year before the 30-06 was, and 7 years before the 375 H&H, and 17 years before the 35 Whelen, which wasn't officially commercialized until 1988. To put 1905 in perspective, it is not only 116 years before today, well, now it's probably 118, but it predates World War I by about a decade and the first commercial radio broadcast by 15 years. In 1905, Teddy Roosevelt was the president, and a German Jew named Einstein was revolutionizing humankind's understanding of the universe via something he called relativity. The 9.3 by 62 echoes dimensional cousins. A German named Otto Bach created the 9.362 rimless cartridge out of whole cloth, although its dimensions look suspiciously like the 7 by 57 Mauser of 1892, and that means it is mirroring our 30-06 for rim, head, and body diameter, even the 17-degree 30-minute shoulder angle. While my Hornady Handbook of Cartridge Reloading shows the 9.362 having a head diameter of .467, live rounds of that ammunition in my possession measure .472 inches. I guess that's okay because a 30-06 cartridge on my desk that is supposed to span .470 inches at the head actually hits just .466 inches. Apparently, there is considerable fudge room in cartridge manufacturing tolerances. One interesting conjecture about Bach's potential blueprint for the 9.362 is the U.S. 3003 cartridge. That's the predecessor to the 30-06. The 3003 was available 2 years before Otto announced his medium bore. Which chicken hatched which egg here? Given the country of origin, it's most likely Bach worked from, or at least took inspiration from, the 757 Mauser or the 8 by 57 Mauser. Indeed, some call it the 9.3 by 62 Mauser, even though it was not created by Paul Mauser. But it does have strong Mauser connections. Regardless of its dimensional inconsistencies, Bach's creation was clearly influenced by the Model 98 Mauser bolt-action rifle of Germany, then a rising star in Africa. Ivory hunter Karamojo Bell was employing one in the guise of a .275 Rigby Mauser. While European boar and stags required cartridge and bullets of this size, German pioneer farmers were probably the bigger market. In 1905, they were busy settling several colonies in Africa, including Tanganyika and German Southwest Africa, today's Tanzania and Namibia. As you might imagine, pioneering farmers had more than drought and locusts to contend with. Lions competed for their milk cows. Eland and buffalo trampled their crops. Leopards and hyenas ripped their goats, sheep, and chickens. They needed dependable rifles throwing bullets that stopped trouble without draining funds. Large-bore British double rifles of that era, designed and built for England's wealthy upper crust, were not an affordable option. But a German-made Mauser was, and it offered other advantages like 5 rounds down and 1 up the spout. Combine that with the reliable controlled round feeding and strong extraction inherent in the Mauser action, and the substantial width and mass of a .33-inch diameter bullet, and you had a firearm as rugged and dependable as an axe, a hoe, or a sledge. The 9.3x62 took off. As I noted in my video presentation on the 9.3x62, it proved so effective that it was grandfathered in when several African countries established minimum power levels at 375 H&H for dangerous game sporting rifles. Poor man's 375 H&H indeed. One can hardly imagine the number of lions, leopards, hyenas, and buffalo shot off the fields and porches of African pioneer farmers with a 9.3x62 Mauser rifle, not to mention the eland and roan and sable and impala taken for the table. The 9.3x62 measures up. In size, the 9.362 case is a bit of an enigma, shown at several different dimensions in various hand-loading manuals. Its rim is specified variably as .468, .470, and even .473, with the head diameter varying from .467 to as much as .476. I measured a Pre-V factory round with .467 rim and a .472-inch head on a Nosler factory load spread .4665 rim and a .472-inch head. Standard for the 757 Mauser and the 30-06, by the way, is .473. Maximum case length of this 9.3 is 2.441 inches compared to the 30-06 length of 2.494 inches, so they're pretty close. Cartridge overall length of the 9.3x62 is 3.291 inches, just a tad shorter than the 30-06's 3.340. So clearly, Mr. Bach's contribution, or his creation, lands smack in the wheelhouse for standard length action rifles with the 7x57 and 30-06 diameter bolt faces. So there's no need for a full magnum length action for handling this cartridge. Maximum average chamber pressures for the 9.362 is 56 and 565 psi, quite a bit more than the 51,000 psi of the 757 Mauser, but less than the 60,000 psi of the 30-06. Such chamber pressures limit strikes. Such chamber pressure limits strike many of us as odd, considering that similar cartridges like the .270 Winchester, often formed from 30-06 cases, are allowed 65,000 psi. Even the little 6mm Remington, a neck-down 757 Mauser, is judged to be safe at 65,000 psi, while its parent case is limited. Part of the reason for this is that when standards for those two older rounds were established, smokeless powders were temperature sensitive and inconsistent. Safe pressures at 50 degrees Fahrenheit in England, well, they could become destructively high at 100 degrees Fahrenheit in Africa. The prudent thing was to err on the side of lower pressures. Despite its lower pressure rating, this 9.362 holds its own ballistically. It spits a 232-grain normal Vulcan bullet, 2,690 feet per second, ahead of 59.7 grains of Norma 201 powder, according to the Norma Reloading Manual of 2013. But Hornady and Nosler handling recipes show a 286 grain bullet from a 24-inch barrel hitting 2,400 feet per second or slightly faster. This bullet size, down to 250 grains, appears to be the sweet spot for the 9.3x62, balancing muzzle velocity and energy for peak performance. The 300 grain A-frame loaded at 2,350 feet per second, shown in the Swift reloading manual, doesn't appear to offer significant advantages, as the accompanying charts show, although momentum and penetration potential could be better. Now, I show a bunch of ballistic charts with energy levels and velocities and drops and all that stuff for comparisons. You'll have to read the blog to see that stuff. And then I continued writing, study these charts of drops, drifts, and energy tables, and you'll begin to understand the appeal and the versatility of that old 9.3x62 in Africa. With a 232 grain bullet, it shoots flat enough for a maximum point-blank range of 255 yards, where it is still carrying nearly 2,000 foot-pounds of energy. And that is with a 6-inch diameter target. While sectional density of that bullet is .247, that's not high, but its diameter of .366 inches, coupled with its impact energy, suggests it's more than up to the task of inviting nearly any deer or antelope to dinner. That includes moose and eland, the world's biggest deer and antelope. But for animals of that bulk, one might want the higher SD, .305, and increased momentum of the 286 grain Hornady bullet. At 250 yards, it is hauling 2,300 foot-pounds of energy. In the maximum point-blank range of that one, it's still a respectable 235 yards. But we cannot leave this poor man's 375 H&H cartridge without pushing bullet mass limits. With a 300 grain Swift A-frame, the SD of this bullet rises to .320, and muzzle energy is up at 3,679 foot-pounds. To me, this suggests we are running out of steam, yet Norma offers a 325 grain bullet. You can call that one penetration station. The 286 grain bullet comes within 20 feet per second of the 300 grains muzzle energy, but it hangs on to more of it downrange, 84 foot-pounds more at 100 yards. By 200 yards, this climbs to 156 foot-pound advantage. Unless one desires the higher SD for deeper penetration and or plans to engage just dangerous game inside of 100 yards, I see little reason to shoot that 300 grain bullet. However, bullet construction options could change this data. It behooves hunters to consider all aspects of ballistics, terminal as well as exterior. The right 286 grain bullet could outperform the wrong 300 grain and vice versa. I know from experience that the Swift A-frame bores deeper than most bullets. I would put it up against any 300 grain of a weaker construction. This leaves recoil as our next judging criteria. My cartridge comparison chart below provides comparisons among the 6.3x62 loads, as well as 3 others in the same ballpark. Understand that these muzzle velocities are not absolute. Factory loads, hand loads, and different rifles and barrels could alter them by as much as 200 feet per second, up or down. The 35 Whelen is considered by many the U.S. equivalent of the 9.3x62. Its numbers suggest that that's not a bad assessment, especially when you compare the 250 grain in the Whelen to the 286 grain in the 9.3x62. The numbers are so close that I'm not sure a blindfolded shooter could identify which one he was setting off. I'm betting game hit in similar places couldn't tell either. Certainly the 375 H&H bumps performance into another realm, but it requires a full magnum length action and about 10 grains more powder to get the job done. You pay the price in recoil too. I then have charts listing the muzzle velocities, muzzle energies, and the maximum point-blank range, and the recoil levels of the 9.362 compared to the 35 Whelen and the 375 H&H, and the 30-06. And again, you can go to the blog and find those numbers and enjoy those comparisons. It's really quite interesting. For many, the choice between the 9.362 and the 35 Whelen might come down to the gun and ammo availability. Neither is ubiquitous, but Mauser, Sauer, CZ, Tikka, Sako, and Blaser chamber the 9.362. Some special run Ruger bolt-action African rifles and the famed number 1 have been chambered in the 9.362. Ditto old Belgian Browning bolt-actions. Virtually any U.S. bolt-action in standard length could be converted to 9.362 with a barrel change. Ammo is loaded not just by RWS, Lapua, Norma, and Cellular Bellow, but by Federal, Hornady, Swift, Double Tap, and Nosler. In the age of high BC bullets and extreme range targeting, it seems passing strange that an old German warhorse like this 9.3x62 would be catching fire. But once you've studied it, you begin to understand. And once you've seen its performance on game, according to those who have, you are sold. In the U.S., it is catching on as a bear round, and it's celebrated as a hog terminator and appreciated as an elk and moose anchor. Many who engage whitetails in heavy cover appreciate it for dropping big bucks where they stand or leaving a blood trail wide and short. When assessing the 9.362 and wondering why it was such an immediate hit in Africa, we must remember that in 1905 there was no 375 H&H Magnum. Smokeless powder had been available for fewer than 20 years, and giving some erratic performance of those early recipes, it was viewed with suspicion by many traditionalists, and they were weaned on black powder cartridges pushing wide, heavy bullets. So mid-19th century dangerous game hunters were shooting 10, 8, 4, and even 2-gauge guns. And they were throwing 1 to 4 ounce lead balls and early conical bullets. Those were gradually replaced by various rimmed black powder 5.77s and the 600 Nitro Express, chambered in double barrels and single shots. Anything smaller than a .50 caliber was considered a medium bore or even a light round, suitable only for the smaller antelope. Velocities were topping out at around 1,800 feet per second. Mass was the name of the game. A mere stripling .36 caliber must have radically been light for the era. Fortunately, the 8x57 and the 7x57 Mauser military rifles had plowed the ground. The heavy bullet paradigm was shifting, and the 9.3x62 arrived as one of the first medium bores to ride that wave. After a mere 116 years, the German 9.3x62 is finally catching some American limelight. Not bad for a medium bore that doesn't even have a last name. Well, that was my blog. You guys can check that one out and read it. And thinking of that reminded me of a great book for African rifles and cartridges called African Rifles and Cartridges. A very poorly designed dust jacket because you can hardly read it. It's so busy. But this is a book by John Taylor. Here, it's a little easier to see it this way. A book by John Taylor published in the late 50s, I believe it was. And he really goes into detail on these big bore cartridges. Everything that was commonly in use back in those days, he experimented with a lot of rifles. And he is the man who invented that Taylor knockout formula, which is misapplied by so many today. His formula was designed to give an indication of the relative knockout ability of a bullet when applied to the brain of an elephant or the head of an elephant. If you missed the brain with a big enough bullet carrying enough energy, you could knock that elephant out, knock it to the ground. But after some time, it would recover and run off. And the heavier the bullet, the harder it hit, the longer it stayed down. And for a poacher like John Taylor, who was making a living by selling poached ivory, it was important to know that he could shoot one elephant and then go after another one or two and come back and finish off the first one had he not hit the brain. So that's an important thing to consider with that Taylor knockout formula. But it's interesting to see just how this 9.3x62, with its different bullet weights, stacks up against some of the other ones. Now, to give you a little better idea of what we're talking about visually, if you are watching this on YouTube, And you can see these cartridges. I want to put some of those up. Now here is the 9.3 by 62. And I should find a 30-06 here. This is a 270, but it's close enough. Give you an idea. Look at the relative size, pretty close. So your powder capacity is fairly similar, but of course you've got that much heavier bullet. Now, a good comparison in the U.S. these days would be the 338 Win Mag. And there you have quite a bit wider cartridge space. Of course, you've got the belted Magnum, and that brings us to the 375, which later on in 1912, that one came out, and there, of course, you had competition with the 9.6. But again, it was a British cartridge, and it was generally loaded up for the higher-end rifles that the pioneer farmers necessarily couldn't afford, whereas the German-made 9.3 by 62 in a common bolt-action Mauser rifle, or even a military rifle that was rebarreled, that they could afford. So there were so many of those being used in southern Africa that it got a reputation of being just as effective as the 375, and that's why it was grandfathered in. Now, you don't have to use a round-nose, old-fashioned call it bullet. You can go with a more modern, sleek profile bullet like this Nosler. And that makes it really effective on elk and moose and any game where you might need to shoot a little bit farther. Plains game in Africa as well. But you can go to the heavier, more bluntly shaped bullets for what a lot of people consider to be more of an impact with the round nose, and a heavier weight up there at that 286 to 300, 325 grain range, and you're hitting darn hard for buffalo. And I have never used it on buffalo, but boy, a lot of folks over there in Africa swear by it. So if you don't want to mess around with the longer Magnum Link 375 H&H, and you want a little bit more horsepower than you're going to get from the 30-06 cased families like the 35 Whelen, step up to that 9.3 by 62, and I think you just might find it is a worthwhile cartridge. Well, let us know if you liked my reading that article with so much ballistic information in it. Maybe it was a little bit too much. Betsy's over there nodding like, yeah, too many numbers.
I fell asleep.
Oh, God. Well, I'm famous for curing insomnia, honey, so this was for folks to go to sleep by. But do let me know, guys, if you enjoy something like that with more of this ballistic information. I've always kept most of that in my blogs because it takes a little bit of time to look at the numbers and absorb that stuff. But then again, there are folks who are driving to work or heading to hunting camp or working in the shop, and they're listening to me in the background, and they're able to think about these things and at least get some ideas of a new cartridge and its relative performance, and then they can always go dive deeper into the numbers later. So let me know if you enjoy that kind of thing. I can read some more of that, or I can just stick with the hunting stories or answering your questions. And we just happen to have a few of those right now. I posted something on, I think it was Facebook. Yeah, it was. I came across an old picture of us loading a nice buck onto the back of a rig. And you could see the antlers right close to the camera. Nice buck. 5x5. Looks like there's a brow tine broken off. But it's about that 160 class. Just one heck of a beautiful buck. And I remembered that buck, and I'd given it to the landowner. He expressed interest in it and hanging it in his lodge. He had a beautiful buck, which was the biggest ever taken on that property. And ever since he got it, he has been working to improve the habitat there. Planted lots of crops and established good cover and protects it and all that good stuff. And he was kind enough to allow me to hunt and shoot a big buck. And boy, he said, boy, that would look good in my lodge. And I could just tell that he would love to have this thing to show folks what he was able to grow on that property. I understand that. And being the age I am and having hunted as much as I hunted, I didn't really need to have another nice set of antlers like that. It's hard for people to believe, but at any rate, I gave him those because I knew he was going to honor them and hang him in his lodge. Let me just read what I put with that photograph on Facebook, and then what a lot of people said about it. I was surprised at the number of comments that came in. So here's what I wrote. If you shot a buck carrying antlers like these, could you leave those antlers with your host or give them to a friend, or would you cast them away and only keep the meat? I gave these antlers to the landowner who had enhanced the habitat and managed the harvest that enabled such a buck to grow on his place. His efforts were certainly more deserving of these antlers than mine were. So I heard from Chris, who said, "What an enormously generous gift of gratitude. He will treasure those for the rest of his life. Well done." Well, I think that's right, Chris. I think he will treasure them more than probably I would, because kind of it was a special thing for him on his special farm, and for me it was another hunt and another nice antler. And I certainly remember the hunt. It was a great time and all, but really not going to honor and respect those antlers to the degree that he probably will. Robert wrote in and said, "Hey, if I shoot the antlers, they're mine. I have never gotten rid of a set, no matter how big or small. Every rack has a story, and the hunt is about the story. I have only given away 3 deer for the meat in 61 years of hunting. I gave 2 to my son with 6 kids and 1 to a friend down on his luck." Well, that's fine, Robert, and there's nothing wrong with that either. I understand that. Most of us hunters like to keep mementos of our hunt, and of course the meat. That's why we're out there. In fact, this year Betsy's a little concerned because we don't have enough game tags to get enough meat. The freezer is about empty, and she's wondering if we're going to get enough, or she needs to buy some grass-fed beef from a neighbor. So I've got to get out there and start hunting. Here is Douglas, and Douglas says, "Hey, great idea. If the landowner wanted them, it would be a win-win for both parties. You will still have the memories and the pictures." And that's a good point, too. Landon says, "Hey, a great replica could be made if it means that much to the landowner." Now, that's a good idea. You can these days make replica antlers, and I have talked with several guys who have done that. They've taken a really big buck or bull, and they will make replica antlers, and some of them will even pay a taxidermist to make a mount of it and give it to the landowner to show appreciation. Now, there's a good way to get invited back. Carl has a slightly different take on it. He says, "Just send him a framed picture." Well, that might do, but, if I have a landowner who I can pretty much tell would really like to have those antlers and mount them, I don't know if that a picture would quite do it justice. Now, Jameson is writing quite a bit here. He says, "No, I couldn't do it, because that would be a personal best buck for me." I can understand that. But you can give it away, Mr. Spomer, because you've shot hundreds of trophies and personal bests, and that is totally good. That's fine. It's okay. However, surely a man of your experience will understand why many of us in your audience would find it silly or ridiculous to give away a rack that good and only keep the meat. Someday I, too, hope to be in a position to be able to say something like that in a social media post. Yet taking the rack and keeping just the meat, that is quite a luxury you have there. You achieved your dreams. Make no mistake, I admire you very much, but it's also a bit ridiculous thing to say coming from a perspective of a person who yearns and pines to shoot a buck like that someday. But I'm poor, and that part is on me, not you. Anyway, yeah, I'd definitely be keeping the rack and the meat, all of it. I wrote back and I said, "Jameson, you are correct. I would not have willingly and graciously given up those antlers when I was in my 20s. I have been blessed, and I am now in an easy position from which to be generous, and I am daily thankful." All right, let's see what Albert has to say. "Hey, if anyone wanted those antlers, they would be welcome to them, and if not, well, I would just throw them away with the scraps." Dudley takes a different tact on that one. He says, "Yes, I could if I needed to, but being as you don't waste any part of the animal, you bring them out, and if nothing else, you give them to someone, or you use the bone to make knife handles or something. Waste nothing. There's always a use for it." So we have one fan throwing it away with scraps and another one making anything out of it. You got to use every scrap. What does Bob have to say? Well, he's calling us fools. "You fools," capital letters. "A deer of that status deserves a full shoulder mount. If you can't honor it, then don't shoot it." Oh, man. So if you shoot a big buck, you have to mount it, according to Bob. I wrote Bob back. I said, "Bob, no need to call folks fools for how they celebrate or honor their quarry. Some feel better about leaving antlers in the field as potential forage for rodents. Some like to bury the heart in honor of the deer. Some display antlers on an external barn door for more people to see them. Some keep them out in the weather or in the house where Few people see them. Some donate them to sporting goods stores for display. Some give capes and antlers to the landowner, who not only allowed to hunt but created the habitat that produced the deer. Honoring the game is in each hunter's heart. No one else fully comprehends how much or how little honor is hidden there. Peace. Peace, brother. Hans says, nope, they mount on my cabin at deer camp. Well, that's a great place to have some antlers. Ed Calvin says, I would rather just shoot a nice fat doe. Then you don't have to fuss about where the antlers go. That is a good approach. And Mike says, Ron, you're a true sportsman. Well, I don't know. I wrote Mike back and I said, hey, thanks, Mike. I try to be, but I'm not perfect by a long stretch. I just try to uphold traditional standards of respectful and honest hunter behavior. We as hunters have a fine and ancient tradition to uphold. And plus, we have too much selfish, boorish slob behavior to offset. We will never win over any rabid, emotional anti-hunters, but we can do a lot to inform sensible, rational non-hunters who truly do want the best for the resource as we do. Sustainable use, plus funding of habitat improvements and reintroductions of game and anti-poaching control and etc., are what restored game abundance in North America. We hunters can and must continue to do this. So hunt honest and shoot straight. Now, we've heard off of that topic on something else. Turkeys, of all things. Given all the cartridge things I talk about, we still have some shotgunners in the audience, and I do need to pay a little more attention to that. This gentleman asks if I have any experience with a dedicated 20-gauge turkey gun. How effective are they compared to a 12-gauge? My wife hunts turkeys with a 16-gauge using a modified choke, and she does very well with it. But it certainly is not an ideal setup for turkeys. I am thinking that a 20-gauge gun would be much better. Yeah, you know, there's a little bit of truth to that, but there's also quite a bit of, let's call it hype. In order to sell special shotguns and special shells for turkey hunting, back in the early years when we really started restoring turkey populations and all, people were really excited about it, and they wanted to use the best tools, the best calls and camouflage and all these things as we evolved into what is now known as a turkey hunter with the turkey hunting gear. That kind of overlooks the reality that before all that stuff was invented, we were still pretty effective at shooting turkeys. That's one of the reasons there got to be fewer and fewer turkeys until we started restoring them. So the older guns can work just fine. And in recent years, Betsy and I have been using 20 gauges and even 28 gauges. And I think the reason is because of the improved shells and the shot. What you need to know about turkey guns and their effectiveness is simply the pattern that you're throwing out there. You want a dense pattern for a headshot. We're shooting these turkeys in the head, so you have maximum meat, good quality meat with no pellets in it. So you want a nice clean shot on the head so you can have a really tight pattern. And that means you're generally going with a full choke or a extra full choke, what we call turkey chokes, that really tighten down that pattern to keep all the pellets close together so you're sure of hitting the turkey in the head. Once you've done that, the more pellets you're throwing out there suggests the further you can reach before your pattern opens up to where you potentially could miss that turkey's head. So what it comes down to is choosing a tight choke and then good shell and shot that maximizes your pattern. And you can test that on paper at distance. So put a sheet of paper out with an outline of a turkey's head on it, or get a turkey target. They sell a lot of those. And shoot that at 30 yards, 40 yards, 50 yards, as far as you want to go, and just see at what maximum distance your setup, that's the gun, the shell, and the choke, are still keeping at least 4 pellets every time into the brain, the neck, spine, column of a turkey. And you're pretty well assured that you're going to get them. And then if you want to be conservative, like I like to be, you just bring it in another 5 yards when you're actually shooting. So I know that this particular gun and load will kill a turkey at 50 yards, but I want to be extra safe, so I'm going to make my maximum distance be 45 yards. You can play it any way you want. Here recently, I've been doing 20 yards with a 28 gauge. Now, there's another thing going on right now that's really pretty exciting, and that is tungsten shot. Lead pellets, of course, are extremely dense and heavy. That's the tradition. Then we went to steel for waterfowl for the lead poisoning issues and stuff. Those are not as dense. So with steel shot, you have to go to a larger pellet. If you shoot 6s in lead, effectively, you'd be wanting to shoot 4s at least in steel. It doesn't carry as energy as far down range, so you're going to shorten it up a little bit for that reason. But even with lead pellets, you want a heavier one, a 4-shot, if you're going to be taking those 45, 50-yard shots, because the pellets start to lose energy, and you want to have enough energy to penetrate too. So the longer the distance, the tighter the choke, and the heavier the shot, and the larger the shot. But with this new tungsten shot, it is so dense. It is more dense than lead, extremely heavy. So it carries its energy a lot farther down range. And as a result of that, you can reduce the diameter of the pellet from a 6 size down to an 8 and get the same energy in that pellet. That means you've got more pellets in a given shell, regardless of the gauge. So you've got longer reach and more effective turkey shooting penetration out at distance. And again, you've got to combine those two. What does your pattern do at what distance? And what kind of energy is your pellet carrying at that distance? So that's the way you look at gauges and shotguns and turkeys. It's not so much that they have to be a 12 gauge or a 10 gauge or anything else. It's all about pattern. All right, let's see what Betsy has for us while she's chasing the dogs back out of here. We don't have a lockable door to the studio, and the dogs like to come up when they hear us talking. Now, this is from Paul, and he's talking about, 22s, getting started shooting 410s and 30-30s. He looks like he shoots a lot of 30-30, and he has a question about it. He says he's really had good luck in his 30-30s with a 160 grain flex tip bullet and load from Hornady. But he still loves the old hollow points from Remington and Winchester. And now he has a question. He's asking me, Ron, have you ever heard of the Remington 30-30 Express rounds? Remington took a .223 caliber bullet, put it in a sabot, and then loaded it in the 30-30 casing. They also did it with a 308, 30-06, and 300 Win Mag. So I've read on forums and other places that these rounds do not work and are not accurate, but I beg to be different. I have shot them in my Marlin 336s, and they shot very well. Not to say that they're shooting 1-inch groups or less at 100 yards, but they shoot well enough to take out coyotes and other varmints. I know that hunters say, well, why not just buy a different gun for that? That'll shoot better at longer distances. Well, I came up in the old school where there was a saying, a man with one gun is more deadly than a man with 10 guns. Have you heard that one? So my wish is that Remington would bring this ammo back, since the old lever gun has become popular nowadays. What do you think? Am I wishing too big or too much? Wish I knew how to contact them about this ammo, but I'm not that knowledgeable on how to contact them. I do, however, have a few left over from experimenting with them. I have also tried to find them online for sale and purchase them with no luck. So thanks for taking the time to read this. You're one of the few great ones left. Hang in there. Thanks a million, Paul. Thank you, Paul. Yeah, I hear what you're saying about that, and you're absolutely right. Those express rounds, I'm not sure they call them the express rounds. Forgotten exactly what they called them, but exactly what you're describing was a nylon sabot, the diameter of a 308, was put into the cases of these cartridges, and inside of that sabot was that little 22 caliber bullet. I think it was a 55 grain. And it would, of course, push those at a crazy velocity because you've got all that basal area of the 30 caliber, yet you've got the extremely light weight. So instead of all of that powder from a 30-30 having to push a 150 or 170 grain bullet, it only had to push 55 grain bullet. Woo! Very fast. So you were getting the kind of performance you would expect from, say, a 22-250 Remington or a 220 Swift, and you got it out of your familiar deer rifle. But yes, most people report that the accuracy was just not up to snuff. And I think you're even saying the same thing here. You're not even getting a 1 MOA performance at 100 yards, which is fine for taking deer and coyotes at 100 yards if that light little 22 bullet is going to do the job for you, and in many cases it will. But most people want that high velocity 22 bullet for 300 yards, 200 yards, 400 yards, longer ranges where the accuracy really starts to add up. So, I mean, if you are shooting one MOA at 100 yards, you're putting everything in an inch. That's wonderful. But at 300 yards, now you're at 3 inches. And if you're not even at one MOA, you may be putting all your shots at 300 yards into 5 or 6 inches. Yeah, no. A coyote, it might not be good enough. So there's where the concern comes in. One man's accurate is another man's inaccuracy. So you have to make up your mind. But as far as Remington still making those, I kind of thought they were, but I gotta admit I haven't checked lately and haven't seen anything. But anyone out there knows. I know some gentlemen from Remington Ammunition, and I will broach this subject the next time I see them. But I have little to no effect on what they decide to build. It's all the market. And if there's enough demand for them, they'll make them. If not, they won't. And to date, I think there's probably not enough demand. There's so many hunters that have precision 22s of various kinds. There's not a big demand for this kind of thing. But it's a cool idea, and I would think that someone with modern technology and materials might be able to revisit that and make a sabot load like that that really is accurate. I don't know. Seems possible, though. How about going to Pennsylvania, where we hear from Andrew? Ron, I hope this finds you and the wife well. Betsy, you're the wife.
I am.
What am I?
The worker bee.
The what?
The
Wildebeest.
worker bee.
Oh, the worker bee. Yes, I am the worker bee. I'd like to get
My
this.
husband. Yeah.
I'd like to get this done so I could go work with the chainsaw and get some more firewood. We had our first snow up in the mountains here, got pretty close to our level, so it chilled it down really sharply, and I lit my first fire of the season in the wood burner downstairs. And when I looked at that wood pile, I thought, maybe I should add a little more to it. So I think I'll be doing a little more firewood cutting and gathering this week. At any rate, we're getting back to poor Andrew in Pennsylvania, who's drumming his fingers waiting for me to get to the rest of his letter. Ron, I recently won a Winchester XPR chambered in 300 Win Mag at a gun club raffle, and I am looking make it a budget big game rifle. Okay, yeah, it should do the job. What would you recommend as an optic for it without breaking the bank? I want to be able to use it for whitetail, deer, and bear, and hopefully someday an elk. Any help and advice you could give me would mean a lot. Thanks in advance. Good luck this year and happy hunting. Well, same to you, Andrew. Yeah, you've got a world beater right there. That 300 Win Mag can do anything and everything. Yeah, people always say the 30-06 is the ultimate versatile cartridge. Well, add 300 feet per second to the velocity, and you've got a 300 Win Mag. That makes it more versatile. So, the optic. You've got the potential to easily reach 500 yards with this thing. Again, I don't recommend that very many people shoot past 400 yards at game because of the time of flight and the animal can move and not perfectly judging the wind and all that. It's just too easy to get a wounding shot. However, you do have that potential. So you're going to want an optic that probably has some magnification on it that you could use. I always find 10x more than sufficient out to 500 yards, but a lot of people want more than that. And these days there are so many scopes that do offer higher magnifications. I think you can do pretty darn well with something going up around 15 to 18 power. Rarely do you need more than that for anything. So look around for something in that 4 to 16 range, or you might even start with 4.5 power at the low end. But don't start with too high a magnification, like 6 power or 8 power. If you do any kind of close range stuff in the woods and whatnot, you might not have enough field of view. The higher the magnification, the smaller the field of view. So you have a little more challenge to find the animal and keep him in the scope during recoil or after recoil. So I would look at something in that 4 to 12 range or 4 to 15x range. I would get a 40 to 44 millimeter diameter objective. I know a lot of guys think, well, you have to have a 50 or a 56 or just a huge one to let more light in. No, modern scopes with fully multi-coated optics are plenty bright enough, even at just 40 millimeter or 44. As your magnification goes up, of course, your exit pupil shrinks and it does get a little dimmer. But I have yet to come out of the woods shaking my head and wishing I'd had a bigger objective lens because I couldn't make a shot at last legal shooting light because I couldn't see the target in my scope. My little 40 millimeter scopes and even my 36s still reveal the target behind my crosshair just fine in legal shooting light. So I just don't like extra weight that I don't really need. That's my personal preference. You suit yourself. But as for the far magnification, that's where I would go. And what brands to get? Oh my gosh, there are so many great ones out there right now. You do want to consider weight as well as size. Some scopes are a little bit shorter. That doesn't make a huge bunch of difference, but the lighter weight to me is important. And Swarovski makes some scopes in their 3 line that are down around 13 ounces in like a 3 to 9. And Leupold has some great lightweights. They get as light as 11 ounces. And there are many, many more. You want durability in that scope too. And that is a difficult thing to identify other than reputation. So don't just take the first person who says this is the world's most rugged scope or the worst. Add them up because there's always one-offs where somebody had a problem with one and he just thinks it's worthless. You've got to get a general consensus going here. And which brands have been around for a long time? Betsy, what are you saying?
Well, he said budget, so Swarovski and budget in the same
Yeah,
phrase.
that doesn't that doesn't belong in the same sentence.
No, but we have reviewed Maven recently. It's a direct sales as well
Yeah,
as track.
yeah. Tracks are a really, really good high quality scope at a fairly budget price. You know, they're the similar quality to the high end ones, but they sell them direct, so you're saving a bunch of money by not having the middleman. And I think GPO, German Precision Optics, has a similar thing, and I think Maven's doing that too, right? But you can also find Mavens, I think, on some retail shops. But we've really been impressed of late with the Maven line. And it seems to me just yesterday I saw one of my rifles had a 3 to 12 Maven on it that was pretty small and light. I was looking at it and going, yeah, I remember why I put this on that rifle. That's a pretty good option right there. So check those out. I hate to just be listing brands because I know I'm going to forget some. Again, there are so many out there, new ones as well as old standards. Burris has some pretty rugged, dependable scopes of reasonable sizes, as well as the big ones now. Just too many out there to even name. Now, if you really, really, really want to go inexpensive, check out our video on the $30 scope. We did this one about, what, a year and a half, 2 years ago, where we said, let's just get a cheapy scope off of Amazon, cheapest one we can find, and just show everybody what garbage it is and how to just don't waste your money. So we got this thing, I think it was called the CV Life. Never heard of it before. Figured what a bunch of fun this is going to be. It was a great scope. It was solid, clean, very well built. It looked like a much higher priced scope, like more like a $200 or $300 scope. So I started shooting it and testing it. Certainly it's not going to be accurate, right? It was accurate all the time. It dialed where it was supposed to dial, and I put it on a 22, a 243, I'm what, a 270 or 30-06 or something, thinking that the recoil would damage it. Didn't. So I put it on a 375 H&H and shot a bunch of rounds with that, and it still didn't break it. So crazy. Now, maybe that was an unusual specimen. We got lucky, but I heard from a lot of people who said they're putting them on all kinds of rifles and they're working out just great. And for $30, it's like, well, why not give it a try? Here's why not to give it a try if you're really not sure about it, of course. You've got it on your rifle, you're on your once-in-a-lifetime elk hunt, and it goes south on you. What do? That's not when you want a scope to fail. So yeah, I don't know how long it's going to last, but it was really surprisingly effective for $30. Crazy. So again, you're going to have to do some research on your own here, but I think some of those brands I listed would be a good place to get started. And I don't know if I mentioned Leupold yet, but Leupold has a heck of a reputation for durability and scopes. And I have proven that for myself by hunting with them a lot on a lot of different rifles and falling on some of them, putting dents in them, and they were still working. In fact, I think I still have that one dented one on the same rifle on which I dented it, and it still works.
Which one was that?
Oh, it's either 2.5 to 10 or a 3 to 10 or something in that range, a VX3. and I had it on a 280 Ackley Improved, and was jumping. We just come off of a glacier, had the full backpack on and all that weight. Now we're jumping rock to rock across a stream, and one of the rocks decided it needed to slip and wobble, which is transferred to me. And I slipped and waddled and wobbled right to the ground and had the rifle in my right hand and just instinctively put my hand down to catch myself. Slammed the rifle and the scopes right into the rocks. But a big scratch in the rifle, the synthetic stock, a hollow synthetic stock, by the way, did not crack open, get damaged other than a scratch. And the scope got a ding in it from the rock that hit the mount. It was a tally aluminum one-piece mount, which I would thought would be fairly fragile because it's aluminum. It only weighs 1.5 ounces each one of them. I use them on a lot of rifles, but that thing took the brunt of the rock and then transferred it to the scope to put the dent in it. The whole rig is still there and functioning. It's crazy. So there's some wonderful durability out there. And by the way, that loophole durability includes all of their scopes. So they start with their Freedom line, which is kind of the bottom of the heap where you're really going to get a good price. So you're going to not have the optical quality of their higher end scopes, but you are going to have equal durability according to their engineers that I've spoken with. They're making them with the same materials and stuff, so you're going to have some really good durability in a scope like that. So give it your best try there, partner, and figure it out. I wish you the best of luck on that one. Now in Montana, we have Ron. Ron says, Ron, just wondering if you could do a revisit video to the 375 Ruger. Is anything new happening with it, or is it just going by the wayside? Thank you, Ron. No, Ron, just this morning, I proofed one of our upcoming podcasts where I interviewed a hunting guide. It was my bear guide up in Alaska last year with Bushwhack Alaska Adventures. And Gary Stewart is the name of this gentleman, and he has had a Ruger in a 375 Ruger chambering, and he has been hunting 14, 15 seasons now with that and shot all kinds of bears because he shoots the bears that decide they don't want to die with the first shot that the client put in them and comes charging. So he has to shoot quite a few bears with this thing, and he absolutely loves it. And ballistically, it's the same as the 375 H&H, but it's shorter. It fits the 30-06 size actions, not the full Magnum length actions. I think it is going to stick around just because there's so many guides who are using it. One of my guides over in Africa had one last year. This was Werner von Seidlitz from Immenhof Hunting, and he was carrying a Ruger in 375 Ruger. So it's widely accepted by professionals who need that kind of quick stopping power in a rifle. Betsy?
I was just going to publish a short that we did in Africa. Coming soon.
Oh, there's a short coming up on that rifle? Mm-hmm. Oh, good. So watch for that, guys. One of our shorts will be on what, YouTube, Facebook, both?
YouTube.
YouTube.
Both.
Okay, YouTube short, and probably get rolled over into Facebook as well. And I'll show you that rifle in 375 H&H. So yeah, I think it's going to stick around. I haven't been hearing much about it other than I'm seeing it in the field more and more. So I think it's a great cartridge myself. Okay, in Texas, we're hearing from Calvin. My question has to do with shooting in moderate to heavy fog. Shooting during times of low pressure usually results in impacting a little high. Recently, though, I was shooting a steel target at 200 yards in pretty heavy fog. Couldn't see targets past 300 yards. The targets are about 12 inches square with a red dot in the center. I was missing the steel completely, missing low off the bottom of the target, little to no wind. What's your experience shooting in fog? Well, my experience in fog is that I can't see far enough to shoot. But I remember one time we were in the fog calling coyotes. Great weather conditions for calling coyotes because, of course, they can't see you. And your sound carries through the fog. The coyotes come to the sound, and when they pop into view, they're within range. And I am sitting there calling away, and I hear thumpity, 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 thump, and approaching coyote really close. And I can't see anything, and I realize the sound is coming from behind me. Oh, boy. I spin around, and the coyote is at 20 yards, coming full bore. All I see is pink tongue and teeth. And Mr. Coyote suddenly sees this apparition that turns into an evil hunter, and he spins to go away, and I got him as he was turning. That's kind of my experience shooting in the fog, but it doesn't handle what you're talking about. Okay, low pressure, not only low pressure, but moisture in the air. Now, moisture in the air actually makes you shoot higher because it decreases the atmosphere, the drag on the bullet, crazy as it is. Lower pressure means there's increased density in the air. The molecules are all closer together. They got compressed, not expanded with heat. So none of that makes any difference at 200 yards in a hunting situation. I'm sorry, there's just not enough difference in that you're going to miss a 12-inch target. You know, it might make a difference of at most a quarter of an inch in your drops. So something else was going on with that miss. It might have been a visual thing. I don't fully understand this, but with a scope, it shouldn't matter. But guys who shoot open sights at longer ranges say that there's lighting conditions can change your perception of where your open sights are in position with your target that result in shooting higher or lower. And I don't know enough about that. If anyone out there is an expert on that, you might weigh in. And if anyone knows if there's a reason why looking with a scope through fog would change your impact points quite a bit, I'd like to understand or hear about that. I just am not familiar with anything like that. So we're going to need some help from the rest of you on there. Weigh in on this one and let us know. And when we find out, Kelvin, we'll get back to you. Kevin in New York. Ron, love the show. Thank you, sir. Just ordered a custom BFR for whitetail hunting northern zone of New York. Got it in a 444 Marlin. Since this is essentially a rifle 12-inch barrel, are you aware of any highish BC cartridges? Most are flat around nose. No, you mean BC bullets, not the cartridge. It's the bullet that has the BC rating. Most bullets are flat around nose for the 444 Marlin. Yes, absolutely. For the lever action rifles, that's what they're designed for, right? The closest I've seen is the Hornady lever variant with a rubber tip. That's probably it. I am just looking for a sleeker, more optimized cartridge, even if that requires hand loading or custom-made bullets, if that's a thing. Curious to see what that round could do if it had a more aerodynamic bullet, especially for restricted states. Thanks. Yeah, Kevin, I think your ideas are right here. It's just, as you say, finding that bullet. I would look toward some of the copper bullets. I would be guessing that these brands like Hammer that make bullets one by one on a lathe, they use a computer to set it all up so they get good precision each time. But boy, that copper rod comes out and the thing starts spinning and all the different machines move into place and they cut it and shape it just right. I think it's fairly easy for those guys to start making a bullet like that, whereas the more traditional bullets with all the different stages on the presses that the bullet goes down and gets formed makes it a little harder to do that on a limited basis. I may be wrong on that, but I'm just kind of guessing. So I would look towards some of the oddball bullet makers out there, the startups that are coming up with new ideas. One other thing that is being developed, I don't know how successful it is, but believe it or not, printed bullets. I've seen some crazy printed bullets, but I don't know if anyone is actually selling any. So you might want to snoop around on that. I wish I could just tell you this is absolutely the one you want, but right now, I think from what I know, that Hornady flex tip bullet is the ones that are designed to be a little bit more aerodynamically shaped because the flexible tip prevents that sharp bullet tip to primer in a tubular magazine on lever action from initiating, sort of like a firing pin, initiating launch. And there are plenty of evidence to say that never happens. And videos showing that, but they're not going to take any chances anyway. If someone's building factory ammunition to be loaded in a tubular magazine, they're not going to put a sharply tipped bullet on it, except for these plastic, soft, rubbery tipped kind of things from Hornady. All right. Colt from Oklahoma. With no specific mention as to influence, he says, I decided to book my peninsula brown bear hunt in Alaska for the fall of 2027 with Bushwhack Adventures. That's why he said, ahem, no specific mention, because I did a hunt with Bushwhack Adventures last spring, and we've posted a few things. I still think we have the hunt itself to put out on a video. But I had a great time with him and shot one heck of a giant grizzly bear, 25-inch head on him. That's width and length, but the outfitter and the guides were pretty excited about the size of this bear's head. He was a booner by an easy margin. So a lot of people have gotten excited about that. They've got a great operation up there, so that's why he's saying it's no influence except for he means there was. At any rate, let's see what else he says. Is there anything you could share with me about preparation for this hunt, since you've had recent experience? I will be taking my Ruger Hawkeye guide gun chambered in .338, and also wouldn't mind a recommendation for a specific factory load or a primer powder bullet combo that you would trust. Thank you for the years of knowledge and shared experience, and please keep it up. Oh, well, thank you, Colt, with support like that, and especially from our patrons. The kind of support that they give us really encourages Betsy and me to avoid the inevitable retirement and keep at it. We've got plenty to do here on the ranch, and we've got grandkids to entertain and instruct and all the rest of it, but there are enough people with good intentions who tell us that they really enjoy what we put out, and that inspires us to keep doing it. So thanks so much for that, and thanks to all of our patrons who help us out. If you would like to join our Patreon community, go to patreon.com and then punch in Ron Spomer Outdoors, and it'll show you how to join us, and then you will offer us a little financial support, and you get some special bennies. Because of that, we'd love to have you. Now, what I would do in that .338, factory loads, it doesn't really matter what brand as long as you like it and trust it. It's the bullet you're concerned about. And with a big bear like this, you want a heavy bullet. I wouldn't get too excited about which one's going to have the highest BC and fly the flattest and all the rest of it, because most of your guides are going to insist that you get close to this bear. They don't want any of these 400-plus yard shots, preferably inside of 200 yards. So you're going to need a thump, and that's what you're going to get with this .338. And 250 grain bullet, maybe as light as 225, is the way to go. And then you want a controlled expansion bullet, and that can be a thickly jacketed lead core bullet that's bonded or has a partition wall in it. That would be the Nosler partition or the Swift A-frame. And then you have combinations of that and the all copper bullets, and the coppers are great. That's what I used on my bear. I used the TSX, Barnes TSX. But you could use a hammer, a cutting edge, a maker, any of those copper bullets, and go lighter, and that will allow you to have more velocity with a little bit less recoil, and you're still going to have the penetration potential of the much heavier lead core bullets, because you generally don't lose any weight with these copper bullets, and they just drive deep. I found that copper bullet that I shot my bear right on the shoulder, broke it, it was just flopping, and then it was underneath the skin, just behind the opposite side shoulder. So good penetration with that little bullet. And that was just from a .338 Federal, not the .338 Win Mag. You're going to drive the same bullet about 300 to 400 feet per second faster. So you're going to have plenty of punch on that baby. But yeah, I think that's the key for you, is just to find that kind of a bullet. Another one you might look for is the Federal Terminal Ascent. Friends and I have been really pretty excited about that particular bullet. It's just a well-designed bullet. They sort of took into account the effectiveness of some lead in a bullet, as well as all copper and expanding noses of a copper bullet consistently, and a sleek shape and a boat tail and all. They combined all of these things to make what they consider to be a premium hunting bullet, and it seems to live up to that reputation. So take a look at that one as well. And there are many others I'm just not remembering right now, but the key is bonded, partitioned, or an all copper or some combination thereof for maximum weight retention while you're driving deep on a big animal like that. Good luck up there, Colt, and say hello to all the guys, because we found they were really a lot of fun and knowledgeable. We were really impressed with how sharp and well-informed these guides were up there. And we particularly enjoyed my guide, Gary, who is into his 14th or 15th season, and he was just the epitome of a great guide. He really knew his business and how to handle his clients, even old geezers like me. We just had a great time. I think you will too. And I hope you don't get those 60-mile-an-hour winds that blow for 4 or 5 days at a time. Ooh, that can be nasty. So now Betsy is going to see if she doesn't have something to say about a comment of the week. I don't think she does.
I do.
Okay, what's your comment of the week, my
I
dear?
like the last one about our Alaska adventures.
You do, huh?
Because it reminded me of how much fun we had and the camp, as well as the professionalism of the guides.
All right, there you go. Comment of the week. Mr. Bear Hunter, good luck out there. All right, so whether you're going bear hunting, pheasant hunting, deer hunting, whatever, enjoy it, hunt honest, and shoot straight. We'll see you next time.